Hey guys, and welcome back to the Warwick F1 show. This is episode 21 of the 2025 season, and in this episode today we are going to be looking back at the events of the Spanish Grand Prix, an incredibly entertaining Spanish Grand Prix at that, where we saw Oscar Piastri take the win ahead of his teammate Lando Norris after a bit of a strategy battle between the two, and then Verstappen, who was running in third, decided to spice up the race by running into George Russell. We will get more into that at a later point in this episode. I'm your host for this one, Anwar, and I'm joined by three guests again this time. I'm joined by, once again, returning guests Daniel and Lucy, and also another returning guest in Vignesh. Firstly, how are we all doing today? And my second question would be, what did we think of the race as a whole? Was it probably? Would we say this is the best weekend of the season so far? I'll start with Vignesh here. What are we thinking?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I think it's probably been one of the better race weekends that we've had. If I were to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably give it a 7, given that this is the first time we've seen a difference in strategy options with the Pirelli choices that we were given this weekend. Because the last few races, it was quite clear that it was most likely going to be a one-stopper or Monaco, which is basically sleeping on a Sunday. But the fact that going into Friday, we found out that the hot tire wasn't an ideal race tire. So this kind of spiced things up as to what tires drivers or teams would pick up as their optimal race strategy. And, seeing, as you mentioned, seeing Verstappen go on a different strategy, or Leclerc choosing to do one run in Q3, and how that helped him get a podium. I think it was definitely one of the better races, and hopefully we can see something similar in Spa. And for a Spanish Grand Prix, honestly, I feel like it was better than last year's race as much as I can remember. But overall, yeah, I'd say it's a solid 7.
Lucy, what do you think? What was your perspective on it?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to now just becoming the habit this year that circuits which are due to be taken off the calendar then produce like the most interesting race they could have done, because we had it with Imola and now we've got it with this one. So I'd say probably not the most interesting weekend of the year. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but there were definitely some more ones which I thought were quite fun. But I'd say definitely up there as being very interesting. Again, yeah, probably a 7, maybe a 7.5. Because I think, to be honest, it was really interesting and the result was interesting. But when I think about it, most of that interestingness came in like the last 20 laps.
It was a bit of a slow burner, and I guess, Daniel, wasn't it? It was once we had a few of the safety cars, or if we had a few incidents, that's when stuff began to heat up.
Yeah, latest safety car restart in Barcelona history, I believe. So a few more of them if we could. Late safety cars, they always make it quite interesting. Yeah, you're right. The race was kind of just chugging along at its own pace. We were just monitoring the gaps up at the front, which Piastri seemed to have under control and did have under control. And then suddenly, within the space of 4 or 5 laps after that, after Antonelli kind of stopped and the safety car came out and went in, the possible length of this episode probably doubled, because we have a lot more to talk about now thanks to the shenanigans that happened at the restart. So I'd probably say, well, the action at the end probably made it an 8 out of 10, but I'm going to deduct a point because I'm still miserable that we still haven't seen a McLaren battle for the win on track, wheel to wheel, like we wanted. McLaren seem to be very good at covering that off with their strategy and not giving their drivers any offsets. So they're monitoring that very well from their side, but I'd like to see some more racing from them. But no, it was a good weekend overall. I probably enjoyed Australia a bit more than this one, but it's certainly not bad.
I would probably be more inclined to agree with you, Daniel, in terms of having an 8 out of 10, just because Max was a bit of a chaos agent and decided to spice up the race. I do also, the point about the McLaren managing gaps, I do think it was looking at certain points in the race that we might have that, and then Piastri ultimately felt, by the looks of things, had it under control, was able to stretch out gaps when he needed to. So yeah, I think that's ultimately a little bit of a frustrating point, that we're not seeing this kind of battle bubbling over between the two. Hopefully that does come sooner rather than later. I do expect it to come. It's just a question of when. I'm going to hand it over to Lucy to give us our race rundown, just telling us who finished where on that Sunday. So take it away when you're ready.
Yes, so as we have already hinted at, Oscar Piastri won the race. There was some interesting strategy about him versus Norris and whether that could end up being close. But in the end, it was a pretty kind of compelling win. It was pretty convincing, and he got the fastest lap as well. He also seemed kind of completely unaware of all the stuff that was happening behind him, because the only thing he really wanted to talk about after the race was some of his issues in sixth gear or something like that. So, you know, he was clearly having a fine time. Norris in second. Obviously, I think he would have liked to have beaten Piastri. Had he got the win, he would have moved ahead in the Drivers' Championship. As it is, the gap's widened back out to 10 points. But I think 1-2 for the team will be solid for McLaren, and Norris is kind of by no means out of this. Leclerc in third, definitely 100% was always going to end up in third. Nothing happened late on the race that meant that he went from fourth to third or anything like that. No. But yeah, Ferrari will be happy with that. I don't know if they really saw it coming. I certainly didn't, but then I never really see anything coming with Ferrari. George Russell in P4. Yeah, he was in P4, had a race which can probably best be described as quite eventful. Then in P5, Nico Hulkenberg in the Sauber, picking up some more points again. I think what's interesting is that obviously there was a little chaos at the end, but, you know, he also just had the pace. Like, he overtook somewhere near the end, which meant that he ended up in fifth place. The sixth place driver, Lewis Hamilton in the Ferrari, who maybe with some more chaos up the front would have liked to capitalise a bit more, but I think, you know, still a very solid points haul. Then everyone's favourite best performing Red Bull driver, Isaac Hadjar, was in P7, meaning that he has now outscored the entirety of Red Bull in the last two races. So well done him. Gasly in P8, very solid race for Alpine. They do kind of need the points, especially with Sauber, who are their closest competition, getting 10 points this race. But, you know, P8, not bad for him. Fernando Alonso finally getting off the mark at his home race, getting P9, and he made it through to Q3 as well. He was actually the only Aston Martin in this race, which I'm sure we'll get to. But, you know, the team will, you know, 2 points when you're at the bottom of the midfield. That's pretty good. P10, he got a penalty and yet still ended up in P10 because even after a safety car, that's how much the grid spreads out. It's Max Verstappen, who definitely was always due to end up in P10, and there's no reason why he ended up there that would be worth meriting whatsoever. Then P11, still finishing behind him, despite the aforementioned penalty, Liam Lawson. But I think he was, you know, sticking close to the points this time. I think he can be proud of that, especially after a good race last week. I think this is on the whole been a pretty good triple header for him. P12, fighting on the fringes of the points as well, maybe showing that somehow Sauber have got actual pace, was Bortoletto, who somehow managed to finish ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, proving once again, in my opinion, that being given the second Red Bull seat is actually a demotion, and that if Verstappen was in the V-Carb, he would probably have a 100-point championship lead by now. P14, Carlos Sainz. This was a rough weekend for Williams, which, if you know me, that's all I'm going to say about it. P15, Colapinto. Yeah, kind of an anonymous race from him in the Alpine, which, I mean, I'd say it's no bad thing, but if the rumours are to be believed about 5 race contracts and things like that, maybe it is a bad thing. Who knows? And then a pretty bad weekend for the Hasses, finishing P60 and P17. Just didn't really have any pace. That was kind of it. It wasn't any particular error on the driver's parts, although Behrman seemed to, and I think Ocon maybe as well, seemed to be enjoying fighting with Lawson for a bit before the car's pace inevitably decided to give up. Those two were the last of the finishers. Then Antonelli, who had a mechanical failure, another engine failure for Merck, which means that he had one in Imola, and obviously Russell had his in Monaco quali, so anyone who uses Mercedes power units will probably not be too happy about the sight of that. but we were all happy because it made it all significantly more interesting. And then Alex Albon, who also DNF'd because he broke his front wing, got it replaced, and then broke his front wing again. And I think maybe they just ran out of front wings and had to retire the car. And that is the 19 people who started the race. And Lance Stroll did not, in fact, start the race because of a wrist injury. I believe the same one for 2023 that got aggravated after qualifying. And so he did not start. And that's it. That's the race rundown. Also, Piastri got the fastest of that, but that doesn't give you any points anymore. So that's not really relevant. But Kick Sauber had the fastest pit stop. So, we've moved on significantly from the days of early 2024 when their pit stops took about 4 hours.
Awesome. Thank you for that very extensive race rundown. Let's talk about the McLarens at the top to begin with before we get into the main course of the podcast, which I imagine everyone is aware of what that's going to be. Firstly, the McLarens didn't look any slower because of this new technical directive that we kind of prefaced in the last episode. They still looked the quickest, and they were able to convert that pace into a 1-2. Was there anything in doubt in terms of that? Did we think that they were under threat at any point?
Not after qualifying, I think. To be honest, their 1-2 seemed pretty assured, especially on Piastri's side, putting 0.3 on Verstappen, who seemed to be somewhat in the fight in that qualifying session, but then just threw the gauntlet down in Q3 and never looked back, to be honest. Lando Norris, he says he knows what he has to do, but he just didn't quite execute it well enough come race day. He got within 4 seconds of Oscar, and then the dirty air started. There was sliding, he was pushing on the tires, and then he says he lost out to the better guy overall. So that intra-team battle will continue to rage on. It's not over yet or anything, but in terms of their advantage over the rest of the teams, I'm not sure many people were expecting it to change purely because of how much notice the FIA gave the teams that they were bringing in this technical directive. Quite a few teams did actually bring in front wing upgrades. A lot of them were very keen to stress when describing those upgrades that they weren't in amendment of the technical directive, and they were purely performance upgrades. But a couple of them did say that we had to change our wing to conform to the regulation, but McLaren weren't one of those. So no skin off their teeth for them. They can continue their seemingly dominant run to some championships.
Yeah, my next question would be to do with the Norris versus Piastri bit specifically, right? Less so McLaren. To Vignesh, basically, what do we think went wrong? Where was there anything that Norris did particularly wrong that led to Piastri ultimately beating him over the course of the weekend? Do you think that there was clear errors on his side, or do you think this was just happens to be a weekend where he just showed a little bit less pace?
I believe this is kind of the year where a good qualifying session ultimately decides the results of the race, regardless of the track. And it's been the case for the last few races. You can see, ignoring Monaco, where it's just basically Saturday decides the result on Sunday. Also, one thing that I noticed that Norris mentioned in his post-race press conference is the fact that the lights went out quite quickly. And that's something I observed. So I believe Norris and Hamilton, one of the few drivers in the top 10 who were caught up by the lights going on quite quickly in comparison to, let's say, Leclerc and Piastri. So maybe that's the reason why he lost out to Max down in turn 1. So I feel like if he hadn't lost out to Max at turn 1, maybe he would have put up a fight with Piastri. And I feel like as long as he manages to fix his probably starts, which was a big issue last year, and try to just maintain, P1 or P2, wherever he's starting on the front row, and keep within 2 seconds of Piastri, he probably has a good chance of, beating him on strategy, depending on the track and whatnot. But otherwise, I feel like in this weekend, Piastri was probably the better driver, and he clearly showed it through free practice 1, free practice throughout Friday, throughout 3 days. And yeah, I feel like Norris maximized the result. Verstappen tried his best to push for a possible P2, but ultimately, as you mentioned, given the pace of the McLarens, I think it was anything but a 1-2 would have been a disappointment for them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think given the pace they showed, I do think Verstappen did make this interesting. Did we like the fact that Red Bull tried to spice it up with a little bit of an alternative strategy, Lucy? Was that something do you think that spiced up the race for you?
I mean, I'm saying this as someone who's probably quite biased, because to be honest, like 60% of the time, my favourite bit of a race weekend is watching pit lane strategy. So maybe I'm not the best person to be asking about this, but I love it when teams go for a different strategy. I think when Red Bull went for it, even without the safety car, it was pretty clear that because McLaren had such better tyre wear, that even them going for the 3-stop probably wouldn't have had a very significant impact. You know, the McLarens were just better, but kind of because the McLarens are better on tyre pace, you know, Red Bull and I don't know, any other team that's trying to challenge McLaren, which right now is just Red Bull, but, you know, maybe one day it'll be a different team. They kind of have to go for a different strategy, which is fun because, to be honest, it's fun to have a look at and see people try to do undercuts and overcuts and work out if they can basically make up, especially because Spain, I think, has a comparatively short, or at least it didn't feel very long, pit lane. You can go for things like 3 stops more easily than a track like, say, Imola, where it's just a very long pit lane.
I think it's the other thing too, is that kind of also made it interesting compared to other tracks, was the fact that there was actually opportunities to make overtakes. I think that the fact that this kind of thing happened on a track where it's very easy for you to make a move into turn 1 or in other areas of the track. We saw Alonso do it into turn 3 numerous times. That kind of threat also is probably something that made it more interesting for sure. Do we expect this to, I guess this is a question to all of you, do we think that this is what the championship will generally look like in terms of one weekend we're going to have Norris have the upper hand on pace, another weekend Piastri will have that same advantage? Do we think that's something that's just going to ebb and flow throughout the season?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it right now. Like you said, maybe we could have some strategy difference, especially on Red Bull's side, because they need to try something different. Because on a lot of the traditional tracks, it seems like McLaren have that pace advantage. So I, for one, I'm very glad that Red Bull did go for that 3-stop. In the end, it ended up becoming a 4-stop, really, because everyone went for a 3-stop after the safety car came out, and most people boxed for those tyres. Obviously, Red Bull made the wrong call with those hard tyres, and that kind of put them out of contention, but it would have been really intriguing to see how the aggressive just pace kind of strategy would have played out for Max, whether he could have rocked up to the back of Norris or what on that one. So that would have been intriguing. But in terms of the McLaren drivers, they are going to have to do it on pace because, like I said earlier, the team seem very unwilling to try anything different and split the strategy between the drivers to see which one's quicker. Maybe they feel like they have enough of a buffer that they can finish in very high positions very often anyway, so they don't really need to mess around with anything that's close to suboptimal. So they just kind of do their own projected fastest race for both cars and then let them sort it out on track, I guess.
Yeah, we're going to hope and pray that this they provide us some entertainment at least. Let's move on to the biggest story of the weekend, which was Max Verstappen, who decided to get a little bit, have a little crash out, I'd say. Does anyone have any initial thoughts on this? What was everyone's perspective on things? I'll start with Vignesh here. What was your initial? What would you summarize this to be?
If I were to summarize this in 2 words, absolute head loss. So just for context, I'm a Leclerc fan. So from my perspective, it seems funny for the first time that Max was given a very Ferrari-esque strategy, something similar to what Leclerc experienced in Silverstone 2022 or Hungary that same year. So to see Max crash out like that for the fact that Red Bull kind of screwed him over with the only choice of tires that they had was kind of funny to see that, Max endure the pain that Leclerc has been put through. So, but honestly, it's kind of shocking to see Max do something like this. for someone who's had 4 championships and fought like quite hard for his first championship in 2021. We've seen him pull questionable moves that year, and over the last few years we thought he had matured, but ultimately he had no competition for the last few years, in my honest opinion. Maybe the last half of 2024, but apart from that, he kind of coasted to victory. So the one thing that comes to my mind is maybe his wheel-to-wheel racing hasn't been tested that quite often, and it's still at the same level that it was in 2021. And when he's put in these kind of situations, it kind of brings out this old Mad Max version of him, if I were to call it. And I think it's not a pleasant sight to see, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. Just to kind of remind the viewers and the listeners what exactly happened on the race restart after the safety car, we saw Verstappen have a bit of a tank slapper into the last corner, going into turn one, left him with a threat to both Leclerc and Russell. He gets overtaken by Leclerc and then makes a little bit of contact with George Russell, forcing him wide. Red Bull asked him to give the position back to Russell, because they thought from their perspective that it was an illegal overtake, because he kept the position by going off the track. We'll talk about whether that is necessarily true in a moment. But then whilst he was asked to give the position back, he has a bit of head loss, like Vignesh says on the radio, and simply whilst trying to let Russell through, decides to give him a bit of a kiss, I'd say, in just as a little goodbye, I would say. And that was rewarded with a 10-second penalty at the end of the race, which demoted him from his finishing position down to 10th, where he kind of lied after all the penalties were said and done. Do we think, I'm asking Lucy this one, do we think that, firstly, he had a reason to be annoyed?
I mean, I think to be honest, when Red Bull said that they needed him to give the place back to Russell, I was a little surprised, because, I mean, that probably shows once again why I'm not actually an FIA steward, because I'm not very good noticing if things were supposed to be sort of given back. But if it was the case that that kind of he wasn't supposed to give the place back, then yeah, there were only a few laps to the end. You would think, I'm having to give a place back that I don't think I need to, and I'm basically losing a lot of opportunities to make the overtake again. Like, this is for position. This isn't being told to let Russell through, maybe you're doing a different strategy, or he's got a penalty, he can go further up the road and then he'll drop back and we'll end up in front of him anyway. This is kind of, I'd be annoyed at that if it turned out that I hadn't had to give the place back. And I think as well, probably being on the hard tyre as well, everyone around was on the softs or maybe the mediums. I can't remember exactly. It's been a few days. But I can see why he was annoyed. But also, I'm surprised that, given that I think he's still in the championship fight with the McLarens. I think that sort of, at least before this race, I would have thought he was. So I was surprised that he would, because surely he would kind of know that going for a move like that would most likely give him some sort of penalty. Then why would he go for that? Would it not kind of be more, surely it's kind of just only the better option to keep the points, even if you lose some points by letting Russell through. You keep more points than if you get a penalty when the whole field's bunched up.
Daniel, do you echo the same sentiment that that he had reason to be annoyed? And do you also, and a kind of follow-up is, do you think Red Bull put him into a bad situation there by putting him on the hard tyre?
Yeah, so there's a few things on that. So Verstappen didn't actually need to let Russell through at all. Red Bull were wrong on that. The driver standards guidelines say that the overtaking car, so George Russell, must have its front axle alongside the mirror of Max Verstappen, tick. He must not force him off at the exit. Well, he didn't. Verstappen chose to take that exit. There was space there, and he must be able to make the corner within the track limits, which he did. But the other criterion is that he needs to drive in a safe and controlled manner throughout the maneuver. But that's what he didn't do, because there was that snap of oversteer that he had in the mid-corner when he was very close to Max Verstappen's inside wheels. And that was what caused the contact between him and Verstappen. I'm not sure Verstappen, that oversteer kind of registered with Verstappen. I think he did very much see it as George has just bumped me off the road. Why has he done this? I'm getting more and more frustrated. Also, why have the team put me on a hard tyre, which we'll get to in a second. So I think that was kind of the frustration there. So Verstappen was entitled to keep that position because Russell didn't have a controlled car throughout the whole manoeuvre, is basically what I'm trying to say. So now about the hard tyres. Why did Red Bull go onto the hard tyres? Well, they did have a set of softs that were available that they didn't use during the race. But the difference is they did a couple of qualifying laps on them, so they were already used. And they also went to the grid on those tyres. So those softs had about 6 laps on them going into the first lap already, which meant that that was only about 2 laps difference to what he was running anyway when the safety car came out. That was kind of 8-lap-old softs, I think, versus the 6. So there wouldn't be much difference. So there wasn't much point boxing for those slightly used softs, but not really. So in terms of new tyres, they only really had the hard, which no one else had run throughout the whole of the race. They had no idea how it was going to run. And Vignesh, I think you make a very good point. In kind of a throwback to Silverstone and Hungary 2022. Silverstone, when Ferrari didn't box Leclerc and left him on old hards at the restart. So he was kind of sliding around and he didn't have any grip. But also Hungary, where everyone else had decided that the hards weren't the way to go in the race. And yet Ferrari decided to put him on the hards in some sort of superiority complex. Oh, our car will make the grip, it'll be fine. It wasn't, and it didn't. And he lost out to Verstappen in that race. So from that perspective, I think the best option probably was to stay out on the tyres that he was on. We saw it from... Not many other drivers did that, actually. Lawson did it. He stayed out on the tyres that he had boxed for on lap 44. He did obviously lose a couple of places at the restart, but I think that's also to be expected for Verstappen when you'd have had, McLarens on their new but used kind of tyres that they've boxed for under the safety car. They would have chewed him up easily. So maybe he could have maintained the sort of 4th, 5th position. But obviously all that went out the window when it was the absolute head loss of George Russell punting him off in his eyes and then being asked to give it back and just kind of trying to make a statement and almost using his car as a weapon, which is, unacceptable. I am surprised that it was only a 10-second penalty for that, to be honest.
We'll discuss the penalty in a few moments' time. I want to ask Vignesh the question. Do we think that Red Bull should have kept Verstappen out rather than just try to play for track position? Do you think that would have been a viable strategy in this case?
Ideally, yeah, it would have made sense. I mean, hindsight is 2020. With Verstappen staying out, even on those softs that he pitted a couple of laps earlier, maybe I think 6 or 8 laps earlier, I would have given Verstappen a better chance of defending for track position for P3, P4. I think he would have been elbows out at the safety car restart, and we know how good he is at the restarts. He's probably the best driver in terms of that particular statistics. So I would have given him a chance. I wouldn't have given him a chance to the McLarens, given that they had relatively newer tires compared to his soft tires. But he would definitely put up a fight against Leclerc and Russell. And the one thing that kind of surprises me is that I don't understand why Max didn't take things into consideration. Like, for example, Max last year when he was when he was ahead in the championship against Norris, he took calculated risks, let's say in Mexico, when he pushed Norris off, knowing that jeopardizing his race along with Norris's race would ensure that, his points gap remains the same. So in this situation, like we say, he's chasing the McLaren. So ideally, the best case scenario, let's say even with the Russell incident, he could have just given up the fight for P4, P3 and P4 with Leclerc and Russell and just said, I'll settle for P5 today. Maybe Canada, we could put up a much better fight. And I guess the reason why he didn't do that is because he was first annoyed by the fact that he was on the hot tires. Second, the incident with Leclerc, it's a racing incident, but of course that kind of annoyed him. But the fact that Leclerc kind of nudged him off, kind of pushing to get slipstream on the McLarens, and then finally Russell bunning him off. So all these things kind of like overwhelm Max, and the usual calculated Max Verstappen that we've seen over the last few years kind of disappeared, and we saw the old Mad Max, and yeah, that's the reason why we saw the incident.
Do you also think there was like an element of desperation in there too, in terms of he's slowly losing more ground in this championship because ultimately the McLarens are showing unbelievable levels of consistency across both drivers. Do you think this was him thinking, okay, I can't afford to lose many more points here on such a regular basis that he had to try and do something? I don't know. Do you think there was that type of frustration building up in terms of just being desperate, knowing full well he's probably losing more ground in this championship battle?
You know what I think? I think this is something new from Verstappen in the way that, yes, it's kind of the old Mad Max in terms of those borderline dirty, or just, if you like, just dirty tactics. But I don't see it in the same way. We've seen it from greats in the past, for example, Schumacher, Senna, or come to mind, obviously, where they pull off these very questionable, pushing the limits to the kind of limits rules, pushing the regulations to the limits rules, in their kind of overtakes and, in Schumacher's case, just punting rivals off the road. But, it always came off favorably for them most of the time. And Max has done it too. Mexico last year, he pushed Norris off twice. And in the end, that stopped Norris from possibly winning that race. And it worked in Max's favour because that limited the damage to his championship hopes. It kept him in it for longer. In 2021 as well, his tactics in Saudi Arabia kept him in with the fight with Lewis Hamilton for that win. But here, it is like it's complete emotion from Max. It's not cold, calculated driving. It's irrational, really. There's no justification except the kind of the desperation, like you said, because he's lost at least 9 points for himself in this title race, which is crucial. He's almost 50 points behind Piastri. I might be wrong here, but I think the record for the most points overturned for the championship is by Max in 2022 to Charles Leclerc, which was only 46 points. So how he's now going to turn over 49 in a McLaren that we expect to be superior for the rest of the year is quite a tall order now. And obviously it makes it hard for himself for the not just the next couple of races as well because of the penalty point situation, but the rest of the year, because a couple of his penalty points expire on the 30th of June, which is after the Austrian Grand Prix. But then no other penalty points come off his license until the 27th of October, which is 9 races after Austria. So he's going to be balanced on 9 points at least until October. So then he has to keep his nose clean. He can't get involved with any more of those scraps. So I think it was quite unwise. If you think of penalty points as kind of a currency, which maybe they are for Max Verstappen to kind of manipulate and use to his own advantage, those 3 penalty points that he's just picked up, they were of no advantage to him whatsoever. So now he's on the brink of a race ban. He can't deploy his old tactics anymore. His back's against the wall, and he's put himself in that position.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up the penalty points thing myself, to be honest, because I think it's worth thinking about not only as kind of the points in terms of numerical value, but also because the points are done that they last for a calendar year. It's not done sort of from race to race. So it's not as in he got penalty points in the Austrian Grand Prix last year, therefore they last until race day of the Austrian Grand Prix this year. No, all of his penalty points will kind of basically expire the day after kind of the Monday of the race where he got them last time. And so he's basically got these points for a lot longer. Like I remember initially it was like he's not on 11 for one race, he's on it for 2 races. And then like Daniel said, he's got those for basically the whole year, especially as you consider the circuits that we're coming up to. We're coming up to circuits like Canada, where, especially if it's a wet race, it's very easy to have incidents there kind of any of which could make penalty points, and especially if the championship fight gets kind of closer and continues as like momentum continues to build, Verstappen will still want to be in that championship fight, and because his car's not as good, he'll probably need to take more kind of ambitious moves, be that in terms of strategy or in terms of going for an overtake that's maybe a bit more audacious than a McLaren in what is usually a faster car on most circuits wouldn't have to take. So he is sort of kind of skirting quite close to the line a bit, which is going to kind of hold him back, not only in terms of not doing things to get a race ban, which obviously would completely wreck his championship because he's already coming from behind, but also kind of is just going to make going for bolder strategy calls, going for bolder overtake calls, going really kind of is just going to make the lives more difficult for sort of the whole team. And especially as well, we're talking about the drivers a lot, but there's also the constructors to consider. Red Bull's currently in fourth, basically being carried by Verstappen. But I imagine while McLaren are really storming into the distance, they're only, say, 20 points behind Ferrari, who leapfrogged both them and Merc by having a good race this weekend. Red Bull will want to keep Verstappen in that car no matter what, because seemingly he's the only one who can actually drive it, and they do want to be in that fight with Mercedes and Ferrari for second place in the constructors. So kind of they'll also now probably be panicking a bit that if for whatever reason he does get a race ban, kind of what are they going to do? They're just going to keep losing even more ground to the teams which they're trying to fight with.
Let's talk about the actual penalty in of itself. I'm going to ask Vignesh this question first. He was given 10 seconds and 3 penalty points. Do you think that was a sufficient punishment for the action that he did on track?
No, honestly, it should have probably been a drive-through. I mean, the FI has always been inconsistent about their penalties. They always talk about the fact. I might go on a small rant here, but the FI always
We
talks
love a
about the
good
fact
rant.
that
Don't worry about it.
Any
No,
rant about the
thank
FIA
you.
is fine by me.
Perfect. I mean, the FI has always, been harping on about the fact that they always, give out penalties based on the action rather than the outcome. But it's clear to see it's never been the case for the last 2 years. And I mean, the fact that Russell willingly cut the chicane and he got a drive through is an example, is one of many examples of where we can say the FI has been completely inconsistent. But in this instance, I'm really surprised why they didn't look back in time to Vettel's incident with Hamilton in Baku 2017, where he was given, I think, a 10-second stop-go penalty. I think something of that kind should have been applied to Max. The 10-second penalties is, in my opinion, a slap on the wrist, and it kind of enables his behavior once again. We saw that in Jeddah in 2021, where he was given a 10-second penalty for. He claims that he didn't brake test, but it was a brake test. So if the FI keeps being lenient towards Max and his actions, or any driver in general, they'll obviously abuse it to the limits, and Max has always been doing that. And this will only cause further harm in the future, where, for instance, like, I think Gasly was one of the few drivers who was closer to a race ban where he never got it. Magnussen was the only one because he was involved in so many incidents where the FI had to say, okay, fine, we're actually going to step in and say you're getting a race ban. And I think the FI are in a sticky situation where, like, let's say Max has an incident in Canada, they might genuinely not give him penalty points because they might think, oh, he is the reigning world champion. What if we ban him for a race? That kind of ruins the image of the sport. So I think the FI will also play it safe. And I think that's what they've done here. And I don't think it's the right thing. And I'm sort of overreacting, but I'm with Nico Rosberg. I think it should have been it could have been a DSQ, honestly, because as Daniel mentioned, you can't use your car as a weapon. Like, you cannot put yourself in a position where you're harming others just because you're frustrated. I mean, every driver has frustrations with regards to how the race went, but you can't take that frustration out on someone else just because of an incident. So I don't know. As long as if the FIA have some integrity, morality, I think they would be strict. And if, let's say, there's an incident to happen in Canada, Austria, they should take up the courage to, give him whatever 12 points depending on the incident and give him a race ban. But knowing the FIA, I don't see it's going to happen.
Daniel, what would you say would be the reasonable punishment? And do you think the punishment that they've given Verstappen this weekend sets a dangerous precedent?
Well, 3 penalty points is enough. I'll cover it off with that first. That is what Sebastian Vettel got for 2017 driving into Lewis Hamilton under the safety car conditions. But 10 seconds is too lenient. I do agree that it should have been at least a drive-through, if not more. Does it set a dangerous precedent? I'm not sure. Maybe there's an aspect in terms of playing devil's advocate for the FIA here. Maybe there's an element of wanting to get the penalty out before the checkered flag falls because it was quite close to the end of the race. They've been criticised in the past for doing their investigations after the race and changing the results once the checkered flag has fallen, which has led to them, falling out of favour with fans quite often. So maybe there was an element of just trying to get it out, and it was sort of rushed in that way, so they didn't have time to review 2017 Baku and kind of apply the consistency that way, which I guess is understandable, but it's still a shame, isn't it, that consistency is not there. And, with that inconsistency, I think the inconsistency sets a precedent more than the penalty itself, because it's sort of a case of a lottery of, well, if I punt this driver out the way, I can scamper up the road by 20 seconds, which means I might get a 10-second penalty and I'll be safe, or I might get a drive-through and I'll have to fall back behind the driver. Either way, I'm going to maybe gain more than just being stuck behind them, for example. So it is dangerous in that way, of course. But then when you think about it, Max Verstappen's intentions were very obvious. His throttle was at 75% when Russell wasn't even fully ahead yet. His steering angle to the left was far too shallow to make the corner when he was on the inside of Russell. So he was clearly aiming for his car. He was looking at Russell's car instead of the apex of the corner. It was incredibly egregious. So in that sense, maybe it was quite obvious that they didn't have to speak to Verstappen after the race or whatever to know what he was thinking. They didn't have to look at his interviews or hear his thoughts. It was obvious, the commentary called it immediately. Nico Rosberg didn't have to see the replay to know that it, was a potential black flag infringement. So, like Lando Norris said, he's tried that move, but only in Mario Kart. Which is quite telling, really, about what he thought of it. Forget Donkey Kong. I think that was just plain donkey wrong from Max Verstappen.
I do like the fact that we're making Mario Kart puns on the day that Mario Kart World is released. I didn't even know that. Yeah.
Cool.
But the more you know. I guess my question I'll ask the same thing to Lucy. Do you think what would be the punishment that you would have set?
I think the 3 penalty points thing is right. I believe it didn't feel like the number of penalty points matched up with the time limit of the penalty. But I think without a driver being disqualified, 3 is the maximum you can give for like a collision, like an incident of that sort that's not some sort of other infringement. I need to go have a reread of the F1 technical documents, so don't quote me on that. But I think that 3 penalty points was the right move, because I agree. It was very clear that there weren't any mitigating circumstances. It wasn't that it was bad. That it wasn't. There weren't bad conditions. There wasn't like gravel on the track or anything. It was abundantly clear that he didn't have a tire lockup. It was also, it basically got admitted by him and the team that basically he did it because he got mad and it was intentional. So it wasn't an accident. And so I'm glad that the penalty points assigned reflect the fact that it wasn't an accident. But I agree. I wonder whether, I know that the FIA say when they're applying penalties that they don't take into account the sort of circumstances. They try and do it just on like a blanket. Like they say, if you did that at any point in a race, any driver did that to anyone else, you would get the same thing. but I'm wondering whether they gave a lower penalty, so not a drive-through or not a stop-go. They may actually be the same thing. I'm not 100% sure. Nothing like that, because it was, only a few laps to the end. There'd been a safety car. The field was very bunched together, and whether therefore they kind of went, well, if he'd done this on lap 20 and he got a stop-go, then he probably would have ended up in like 6th. I don't know, but we're at the end, so we won't give him a full stop-go because that would just drop him right back to the bottom of the field, which isn't realistically how things would have played out, even if I think it kind of defeats the point of having penalties that match up to rules if you don't always follow them. So I think the penalty points were fair. I haven't watched enough races with drivers brake checking each other, certainly not for a while, where there's examples of it being so obvious that kind of a driver's done something wrong intentionally, that to make a judgment on whether he should have been disqualified, I'm kind of in a way glad that he wasn't, because I think that the debate around what would have happened had he been disqualified and whether he should have been disqualified, especially if it turned out that he didn't actually have to give the place back to Russell, would have been probably much worse than our debate that we're having now. And there would have been more questions about, maybe probably unwarranted ones, but the FIA trying to sort of swing the championship or anything. But I'm kind of glad that he wasn't disqualified. But I agree with what the others have said. I think a stop-go probably would have been stop-go and 3 penalty points would have been the way I would have done it. But yeah,
I think we all kind of agree that there should be a little bit more of a severe punishment, and he's got away very lightly with it, even though he's got the jeopardy of those penalty points looking forward. Let's move on to some of the beneficiaries of this incident, this controversy. The first of which is someone who actually ran a very underrated race, I felt, and that was Charles Leclerc. He started in 7th, finished in 3rd. Showed good pace and good overtake, good pace throughout. Had a couple of overtakes, namely the Verstappen one. This was were we surprised that he was able to pull through a performance like this, or is this just how Ferrari can be? They're so inconsistent that we kind of never get a real gauge on where they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think I say it every week that with Ferrari, I just have no idea what they're doing. I don't really think they know what they're doing either. And I'd hardly say that this race has restored my faith in Ferrari and that they're always going to be around that sort of upper midfield, fighting at the front, probably not with McLaren's, but they're in for a podium and they can do strategy. It hasn't completely restored my faith in that, I will say. However, I think that this is now, admittedly, one of them was Monaco, and this is Ferrari, and Ferrari are quite good at qualifying around Monaco, and maybe they were helped by some ride height things there. But that is now two podiums in a row for Ferrari, and 2 very solid podiums. One was a very solid 2nd place, and the other was a podium achieved by just having a better strategy than Red Bull, which is not a sentence I ever thought I'd say, but here we are. So I think that this is maybe there's some positive momentum for Ferrari now. I don't think that sort of they've by any means taken a massive step forward in their performance or a massive step forward in their consistency. But I was less surprised to see them fighting up the front of the field to be, let's be honest, if about kind of 4 races ago, I'd seen a Ferrari fighting with a Sauber, I would have assumed they were fighting for like P14, not P5. Whereas this race, when that happened, I was like, what is a Sauber doing in P5? I was thinking, how has that got up that high, as opposed to why is a Ferrari down that far on the grid?
Yeah, it was a weird. I was pleasantly surprised by the Ferraris, because although Hamilton still doesn't seem to have got his hands around this Ferrari, we'll get to him in a moment. Leclerc is still showing that he's still showcasing his talent in that car, even if it's not exactly fighting with the McLarens. He's he's there picking up points consistently, I feel. So that's a good sign. In terms of Hamilton, I'll ask Daniel this. Is it just it feels like a broken record here, but is this still as worrying as it used to be, or do you think we're just going to have to get used to Hamilton having some of these performances with this Ferrari over the course of the season?
I hope not, because Lewis Hamilton is a highly competitive individual, and he was so downbeat in the post-race interview. He said he's learned absolutely nothing pretty much from the weekend, so he's been struggling along. Qualifying wasn't great, the race wasn't great, and yet he's got pretty much nothing out of it in terms of learning, which kind of sounds a lot like the second Red Bull situation in a way. Yuki Tsunoda just saying that any setup changes that they made in qualifying put a plaster on the issue. Even the pit lane start that they had, changing the setup with the car, it didn't feel any different to how it did the day before. So that was a shame. They were definitely the most despondent drivers in the post-race interviews. And just on Hamilton, he's been able for so long to keep up with every teammate that he's had. He's never floundered against them particularly. He's so hyper competitive against them, and that's why it must hurt so much. Maybe it is an age thing. That's probably what he's thinking to himself. It's what we're all thinking. Was the blip in air quotation marks at the end of last year with Mercedes in qualifying not really a blip? It was the beginning of the end, which is a sad thing to say, obviously, because he's a 7-time world champion. But it doesn't seem to be much improvement, to be honest. I mean, there's the odd... he out-qualified Leclerc, I can't remember when it was, but he out-qualified Leclerc not long ago. But on the whole... Wait, was it? Hang on, just a second. Was it this weekend that he out-qualified?
Yes, because Hamilton was ahead. But Leclerc finished.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Hamilton started 5th.
Yeah. So Leclerc took that gamble, didn't he, in kind of preserving his tires for the race, which made a lot more sense. That's why he was able to get up into 3rd position in the end. And it was a great contrast to Hamilton, who was overtaken by the Sauber and didn't really have many new tires. So it was just a really a poor showing, really, sadly.
Let's go to... I think the next place we should go to is to the Xbox on wheels. Because for whatever reason, I'm seeing a green car that isn't an Aston Martin in the top... For not only the top 10, but in the top 5. Vignesh, how surprised were we that we are seeing a Kick Sauber fighting amongst the Ferraris?
See, probably one of the biggest surprises of the season so far. I genuinely thought that Sauber were going to have a similar season to last year where they were only going to pick up points in maybe 1 or 2 races. I mean, Hulkenberg did pick up, I believe 6 points in the first race in Australia, which was a crazy race. So I was going to get, my guess would probably be that he would pick up points in another crazy race, not a race where, it would be dictated on strategy or like tire choices. And it's good to see that Sauber's, I think they brought in upgrades as far as I heard from both the drivers, and it seems like it's working on both the cars. As Gabriel, I think, qualified P12, which is probably his best qualifying. I think Hulkenberg missed out on qualifying. I think he mentioned on Saturday saying that he could have probably done better. Maybe he qualified somewhere around, again, P12 or P13. But the start that he had was quite amazing. I think he jumped like 3-4 places, and I think that's what put him in a good position. Initially, the fact that he was able to jump up to like P13, P14, and then slowly build his way up. And maybe the fact that he got knocked out in Q1 is the reason why he had like a lot of new soft tires that he could just put on towards the end of the race. So it's good to see Sauber pick up points, and if I'm not mistaken, they've jumped both Aston Martin and Alpine. So, and hopefully maybe Gabriel Bortoleto with a better qualifying can start, picking up points here and there, maybe in another crazy race. But it's definitely good to see the Sauber back up, and hopefully this is a step in the right direction, given that RE is coming in next year.
everyone knows that the technical directive was brought in to help Sauber get back into the points, right? That must have been the whole point.
Yeah, it was to try and it was purely for them and them only, isn't it?
Yeah, clearly they must be paying some top dollars to the FIA. They did have some upgrades. They had a couple just to the floor. Just quickly, they had an upgrade to the floor body, the engine cover, and the front wing, which were just all performance and providing downforce basically. So that's why they were so quick during the race. Pretty much, that was it.
Yeah, as a generational kick hater, I must admit this was very, very surprising to see. And it looks like it wasn't because Hulkenberg obviously had a brilliant start, with leapfrog so many positions, but also had the pace to maintain that position. But it was also the fact that Bortoleto was near the points as well. I think that signifies that this upgrade has actually had quite a significant impact on that car, which I guess I didn't expect. And considering the fact that Audi are coming in next year, they probably want all the wind tunnel time that they possibly can get. So massive surprise on that from that perspective, and good on Hulkenberg for getting in a position where I imagine none of us would have expected to see him this year. In terms of other notable people to talk about, maybe Isaac Hagel finishing in 7th, continuing some good performances. But then also Fernando Alonso finally on the board, on the points board, because he had to work for it with some brilliant overtaking into turn 3, but he has officially got 2 points in this F1 Drivers' World Championship. Was it about time for him, or did we were we expecting him to just be unlucky all year, Lucy?
I feel like you've come to me for this one to absolutely set me up with my prediction again. So thanks for that. But
no worries. I'll do what I do.
Yeah. Oh. But no, I mean, he's been ridiculously unlucky. And so I think, to be honest, obviously the best place if you've had an unlucky season and not scored any points to break that duck is at your home Grand Prix. But I mean, he had a good qualifying, and then even with the fact that Aston only had one car, I was thinking, wow, this is so many less opportunities for them to mess up strategy because they've only got to think about one car. And yeah, he did some good overtakes. So to be honest, did I think there was the possibility that his engine just like blew up basically until like the last corner? Yes, of course I did. This is Fernando Alonso in 2025 we're talking about. That seems to happen all the time. But no, I'm happy with him, and I think he's put a lot of effort in, and he made some good moves, and it has been because of bad luck. It's been because of strategy or mechanical issues. It's been, especially the last few races, it's been abundantly clear that he's been there and fighting for points, and he's just had bad luck to not get them. So I'm glad to see him get some.
Anyone on the contrary to that statement of us being happy for Alonso? Anyone annoyed that he's finally got points?
So distressed that Fernando Alonso has finally got the duck off his back, you know.
No, it's such a horrifying circumstance that Fernando Alonso has got points.
Especially as home Grand Prix as well. Like, that
It's
really
even
sucks.
worse, isn't it?
Yeah,
How devastating.
sure. It was really nice of the number one Aston Martin driver, Lance Stroll, to take the weekend off and just give Fernando a better chance of scoring some points this weekend, though.
I definitely saw a meme at some point that was like, maybe it's actually just Lance Stroll pretending to be Fernando Alonso in Fernando Alonso's car, and that's why he scored points.
We will never know the true answer to that question. On the Lance Stroll topic, where it looks like he is injured for a couple of races, which by the looks of things, it will be Felipe Drugovich who is likely to step in for them. I guess it's obviously upsetting to see that we're not getting Lance Stroll isn't able to compete, because I think he's shown some good pace at times this season, shown that he can be competitive. So yeah, it's kind of sad to see that it's kind of his aggravated wrist injury has come back again and it's reared its ugly head. Let's move on to our predictions and round out the show, shall we? So who wants to go first? I know, Lucy, you hinted at some subpar predictions. Would you like to go first?
Fine.
You seem really happy.
Okay. This actually starts off okay. And I want it to be known that I'm not trying to make good predictions. I'm trying, hopefully through the power of continued delusion, to get Williams a podium. So just bear that in mind while I read these out. So I said that Piastri was going to be on pole. So I think I get a point for that. Do I get a point for that? Please say I get a point for that.
You do indeed.
Yay. I may be on 2 whole points then for these predictions. I said Norris was going to be P1. He was not P1. He was P2. In my defense, this whole sort of top like half, which I was writing my predictions for, was fundamentally based on my random prediction, because that didn't happen. Nothing else happened. I said that Verstappen was going to be in P2. That obviously didn't happen for aforementioned reasons. But, you know, up until the safety car, I was thinking, okay, I'm probably going to at least get 1 point for this. So there's that, I guess. P3, Alex Albon, we're not going to talk about that. P4, Piastri. Again, my random prediction kind of skewed how I thought everyone was going to do. He obviously won. He did not finish P4. He got significantly more points than I was predicting that he would. So well done him. And then P5, Carlos Sainz. We're also not going to talk about that. We're just going to move on and get someone else to do their predictions now.
Cool. Daniel, would you like to go next?
Sure. Okay, well, pole position was supposed to be Max Verstappen, only a couple tenths off, you know, not too bad. But P1 was also meant to be Max Verstappen, which was pretty bad since he had his worst finishing position since about 2017. So that's good stuff. P2 Norris, which came through, thankfully. Not in the way I thought it was going to, but it still did. P3 Piastri, no points for that. He was much stronger than I thought he'd be at a track where Norris was much faster than him last year. P4, Carlos Sainz. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I should probably get negative points for how badly this turned out. I think Williams must have been running a 2019 tribute in terms of how slow they were during the weekend. It's just the medium speed corners, I think. It wasn't the technical directive, it was just characteristics of the track. Didn't expect to suit them at all, and obviously not good enough for P4 at the 55th Spanish Grand Prix. P5 Leclerc, which was apparently not optimistic enough for Ferrari. Leclerc got that podium. That's my top 5.
Awesome. Let me go through my top 5 and pole. Sorry, so I put Norris on pole. I accepted him to convert it. He didn't convert because he never had it. So it ended up being a Piastri win, obviously. So 1 point for Norris there because I put him first. I put Piastri in second, so 1 point there. Verstappen in third. Did not expect him to turn it into Mad Max or have a mega crash out in the car. Maybe I should have thought of that for next time. I put P4, I've put Russell, so that's 3 points there. P5, I was less than optimistic about Ferrari, and they surprised us with a P3 finish, so no points there. Catch was also on the show last time, so I'll go through her pole and top 5 predictions as well. She, in classic Catch fashion, decided to go for a Norris pole and a Norris win. Now, we all know that didn't happen because Norris was not on pole and Norris did not win. Norris finished second. So 1 point there. She put Verstappen second. That did not happen. Piastri in third. Did not happen. So 0 points across both of those. She put Hamilton in fourth, being very optimistic for his performance. Did not turn out well. And Russell in fifth, which gains her 1 point. Let's go through our DNF and random predictions. Lucy, can you take us away?
Yes, so as previously alluded to, I said that Fernando Alonso would DNF. I don't think that was unreasonable to predict, but it obviously did not happen. And while I am devastated that I didn't collect my handy-dandy 3 points from that, I can't say I'm that upset about him not DNFing. And then my random was the McLarens have a collision. So at least I predicted that something involving some cars at the front of the grid having a fight would happen. I'm getting tangential here, but I really need something to cling to. And this is not to get you to give me points. This is just so I can tell myself, please, I'm not as bad at this as it appears. I think that's therefore 2 points for me overall, which I will take. And I will go for the record of a whole 0 points another time.
There's always another time to predict 0 points, isn't there? I was never considering giving you points, by the way, just to make that clear. Daniel, let's go through your DNF and random predictions as well. What did you put?
So DNF was Bortoletto, which didn't happen. The random prediction was Fernando Alonso scores points. So I guess I won what happens to Fernando Alonso between Lucy and I. He'd finished only 11th, 15th and DNF'd this season before the Spanish Grand Prix. So at least he finally got some points.
Cool. Let's round up the show with mine and catches, and then we can call it a day there. So, looking at my DNF, I put Ashla Kajar. Did not happen. He continued his good run of form, and I put Yuki Tsunoda in the top 8, which did not happen. Just continuing to disappoint, really, unfortunately. And then for catches random predictions, I think it's, again, a lack of success there because she said an Ocon DNF. I think Ocon was just slow. I don't think that car had much pace, but he did not DNF, so no points there. And then random spins, so 3 random spins by different drivers on their own accord. Now, I don't think we had a single spin in there, so even if there was one there, she wouldn't have got the point, but I don't think we had any of those anyway. Awesome, we can round off the show there. I want to thank my 3 guests for coming on, and thank you to Daniel, Lucy, and Vignesh for joining me on this review of the Spanish Grand Prix. I wanted to thank you guys for watching or listening from home, and we will see you at some point next week when we preview the Canadian Grand Prix, which is bound to be a good one. So we'll see you. We'll hear from you from then. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.